This will be the first training that is focused particularly on youth and young professionals. So you're leading the way for us on this. And we look forward to learning from all of you as well. I would like to thank and also recognize the fellow speakers this morning for our welcoming program. Ms. Articola, who will be speaking next, as well as I'd like to recognize Major General Bindal, the Executive Director for the National Institute of Disaster Management in India. It's a thrill to join this platform with these distinguished speakers. We've experienced quite a bit of flooding around the world, so this has our attention now. And again, I thank you for your time and for your dedication to learning and practicing flood management where you live around the world. So with that brief opening remark, I will turn the floor over to Ms. Articola, our colleague and friend to the Flood Green Guide program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Anita. I think Ms. Kusum is facing some issues joining the training program. Let's wait for her for 1 or 2 minutes. Yeah, she's joining in 1 or 2 minutes. Let's wait for her, please. Uh, Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Ms. Kusum is facing issues joining our program. So let's go ahead and now I'd like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Navneet Yadav, Program Director, DUOS, to speak on the topic Understanding Disaster Risk, Hazard, Vulnerability, Exposure, and Capacity. He's a leading DUOS, a Shimla-based humanitarian organizations working towards resilience and sustainability in the Himalayan region of India. He has 16 years of experience of dealing with issues pertaining to disaster risk management and climate change adaptation while serving renowned national and international organizations. He's a great teacher and trained thousands of students, teachers, professionals, and government officials. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Nitish. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. And hello, everyone. A very good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are joining from. I believe that it's not a uniform time for everyone who is attending this session. So before I start my session, I would just like to highlight a few things about the way we have been seeing disasters as. So I hope all of you have seen the recently published report by the IPCC, and it indicates that there would be a near certain rise in extreme weather events in majority of the places in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And I believe that there are other consequences of climate change which other nations would be facing. So the future is now very much clear to us that we are certainly going to see a future which won't be a copy of our past. So this becomes very important for all of us to kind of understand the risk, and they vary from one country to another, one region to another. I live in the Himalayan region of India, and for the past 15 or 16 years, what we have been witnessing here in this part of the world is an unprecedented rise in the magnitude as well as frequency of extreme weather events. So with these words, I would like to start my formal session. Let me share these slides. Nitish, is this visible?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the topic assigned to me for this discussion is understanding disaster risk. And while a majority of us who have been working in the field of social development or even environmental sciences, I believe some of us have experienced at least a few of these words that we are going to discuss in this session. Uh, Disaster risk is something which has gained traction in the past few decades, especially because the way we have been seeing looking at disasters, it has been I think very passive and very reactive in nature. So the common term that we use in our sphere is disaster management. But if you think to manage a disaster, you in the first place you need to have a disaster. Yeah. So this is very important that all of us realize the need of looking at disasters from a new perspective, and it requires us to understand what exactly is disaster risk. So I understand that some of you are students and some of you are professionals. So in my opinion, I think the basic concepts, they do not discriminate among who we are. Of course, the expressions might be different. So in your world, in your sphere of things, I think you can bring in local examples, local context, and use the same understanding, because most of the concepts that we will discuss in this initial introductory kind of session, they are universal. Yeah. So I request all of you to kind of align your own knowledge with these concepts. So okay, so the image that you see on your left is a GIF image which is in loop. Yeah. So if you pay attention, if you look at this image very carefully, then you would understand that these buildings are shaking. So there's a phenomenon that is happening at the moment, and it is easy to guess what phenomenon it would be. So this image is from Japan earthquake 2011. So the picture that you see on your left represents a hazard. Hazard is nothing but a phenomenon or a human activity which has the potential to cause harm. Harm in the sense of like it could be in the form of loss of life, injuries, or damage to property. So on your left is a hazard, but when does a hazard convert into a disaster? So for that, you need to have a look at this one. Okay. Just, Nitish, I think the screen is frozen. I don't know what's wrong with this because this is very unusual. Can you hear me, Nitish?
Sorry, your screen is frozen, sir. Can you?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Let me just exit this.
Or maybe, yes, exit one more time and then you can.
Yeah, I'll just exit this and because at the moment nothing is working. No keyboard, nothing. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, perfect. I think there was a lag in the processing.
Now it's moving.
I'll share the slides again. Um, please bear with me because this is an unexpected kind of issue and it generally doesn't happen. Just give me a second. All right. Okay, so I'm continuing with what we were discussing. So on your right, the image that you see now is from 2015 Nepal earthquake. And here, that the potential that hazard has, it has been manifested in the form of losses, in the form of economic losses or even environmental losses, or in the form of damages that has happened to this built environment. So this is just one of the examples to understand what is the difference between a hazard and a disaster. Now we'll move to the next slide, and again it's lagging. Maybe it's the bandwidth because yeah. Okay. So similarly, yeah, Nitish, you are saying something?
It's not lagging, so we can what we can do is you have to escape the presenter mode and that time like that you can. Now it's working fine.
Okay, great. So similarly, a hurricane or like fast blowing wind is just a hazard until and unless it causes some losses and damages to property. It won't be called as a disaster. It would still be a hazard. On your left, what you see is novel coronavirus, nCoV-19, which is a hazard. So if imagine if there is a I have this virus in my body. So as long as I do not infect other people with this virus and it doesn't become a problem of a large scale, it won't be called as a disaster. So what is a disaster is something that you can see in this GIF image. And we all can recollect what happened in January 2020. We were completely or largely unaware of the problem that we were going to witness in the following months. So what happened is that the same virus that you see in the left side, it got converted into a large scale issue, and we all know it as a disaster now, a pandemic. So moving further, if you see the any hazard, whether it is a natural hazard or a human induced hazard, when it becomes disaster, there are certain attributes. It has to cause some loss of maybe your assets, or it may be cause It may be causing loss of life in terms of like injuries, like there might be some physical injuries, and then it might be causing loss of your property in terms of buildings and other things, and then the health cost, because if someone is admitted to a hospital for a considerable period of time, it kind of drains the whole economy of the family. So, and similarly, if there is a disaster like COVID-19, so and we all witnessed this, like there was a huge number of people who lost their jobs last year, and I think some of them are still struggling to recover their jobs. And then comes this kind of thing, which cannot be measured. Like you see, like people who have lost their loved ones to a disaster. So if you see, now they are forced to live alone. Last year, what we saw was, in a way, was unprecedented for the modern world. And we saw so many people losing the only ray of hope for their lives. And it resulted into a huge pandemic, which was hiding behind the main pandemic. You know, like I'm referring to the mental health pandemic that is still ongoing. So this is one of the major but still ignored aspect of disasters. And I urge all of you to pay attention to this part particularly, because I think regardless of our places, regardless of where we come from, the impacts of a hazard which result as a disaster, they are, I think, they are shared. They are like the kind of experiences you had last year may not be different than what I had. Yeah. So it requires loads of learning and sharing and mutual understanding also. And then the final and the most dreadful kind of impact of a disaster is we all know is death. So if we look at this spectrum of uh, impact of disasters on human lives, I think it's very important to pay attention that we can, by doing something, we can reduce the overall risk. If we pay attention to what exactly happens to people in the aftermath of a disaster, we can certainly control some of these impacts or reduce some of the impact effects on human beings. So moving forward, this is a definition by United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and I'm not going to read this. Yeah. So the most important part here again is a disaster is a serious disruption of a society, like the functioning of a society or community. And the most important part here is the interaction of these four things, which are now highlighted as red. And as my fellow learners, because I am also a learner in this domain, like uh, I have been working in this field, I think since 2005, after the Kashmir earthquake of 2005. And whatever I have learned is through my field-based experiences, which are blended with the academic knowledge and the research that has happened. So I would still emphasize on understanding the conceptual part first. So hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and capacity. When these four things interact with one another, they cause a serious disruption in the functioning of our communities and societies. And then it results into human life, loss of human lives, and material losses and economic losses and environmental losses and their impacts. Yeah. So before we move further, I request all of you to pay attention to these highlighted words like in red. Yeah, hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and capacity. If you understand all four of these words, you would understand both disaster as well as disaster risk. Yeah. So now you might have seen similar kind of thing, but because I essentially work in the field of disaster risk management, and it is my job, like you can call it a occupational hazard, that I have to deal with a number of people who are not so fond of reading and like going through definitions. So I'm presenting an illustration of disaster risk, how it is generated, yeah, how disaster risk is created. So the first thing that we have to understand, what forms or what constitutes disaster risk is this part. Yeah. So okay. Yeah. So imagine there's a slope, mountain slope, and there's a rock which is kind of hanging in an unsafe, or like it is stuck somewhere in an unsafe kind of situation. Yeah. So if this rock falls down, yeah. So this was a phenomenon, yeah, or an event. So this event or phenomenon, or even somebody pushed this. So this event, phenomenon, or human activity would be called as hazard. Yeah. So this is hazard. And uh, like a hazard is like not generally not in our control. Like you can't wish away a heavy rainfall, you can't wish away an earthquake, but you can certainly do something about human induced hazards, yeah, and technological hazards. So there are different types of hazards, natural as well as human induced. But please pay attention what we are talking about. At the moment, we are discussing just hazard. Yeah. So hazard is an event or a phenomenon or a human activity which has the potential to cause harm. So I again animate this. So this part. So this phenomenon or human activity would be called as a hazard. So if you pay attention to the definition of the UNDRR, I won't read it out because I think you all can just have a look at it. Yeah. So a process, phenomenon, or human activity which may potentially cause loss of life, injuries, or any other human health, or even environmental degradation also. Yeah. So now coming to the next part of this dimension. So if you pay attention to this guy, yeah. So at the moment, you see this guy is looking fine. Like if this hazard, it manifests, this hazard starts taking place, this gentleman still has some chance. So what you see at the moment is someone who doesn't have any form of barriers, or he is not under any difficult or very challenging kind of circumstances. So even if this hazard, it takes place at the moment, so this person can still try to protect himself or herself. Yeah. So now pay attention what has just happened. Now what you see in the form of this stick, this stick represents some kind of barriers, some kind of challenges that this gentleman is or possibly may face when this hazard would be impacting him or her. So this stick represents vulnerability, which is nothing but vulnerability is the set of circumstances or the set of conditions which render some people more at risk, or more prone to that particular hazard. Yeah. So the chances of this person getting affected by this hazard are more because of his or her vulnerability. In place of a person, you can consider a building also, you can consider an ecosystem also. So vulnerability varies from one context to another. So it's a very, like there's 1,000 research papers that you may possibly find within 1 year on vulnerability. Yeah. So but the basics that we are discussing at the moment are very important, and they are pretty much the same. So uh, so we have discussed two aspects of disaster risk. One is hazard, another one is vulnerability. So vulnerability, as I said, according to the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, vulnerability refers to the conditions determined by physical, social, economic, and environmental factors or processes. And now you can see which increases susceptibility, like the degree of impact would vary based on the vulnerability of one person. So if there's someone who is not in a very good financial health, or not in a very good psychosocial health, then there are more chances of that person getting hit in a worse manner by the same hazard. Yeah. So now we discuss the third dimension, and it is very important for all of us to pay attention to this one, because this one is more about probability. The dimension of probability in disaster risk is more caused by this aspect, which is called as, we'll see. Okay, so every hazard has a time and a location for its manifestation. So if you are living in a coastal area, your house is located at a coastal area, or like close to a beach, you are always exposed to tsunami hazard. Yeah, right. So we live in mountains, in the Himalayas. So we are always living under the exposure of earthquakes and landslides. So similarly, in this equation, if you pay attention, so exposure is the time. Exposure has these two elements. One is time, another one is location. So there's two-dimensional point. One is the temporal, second one is the spatial. So if someone, or it may be a form of property instead of a person, but imagine if this person, this vulnerable person, he or she is at the wrong place at the wrong time. So what I intend to say is this, that if someone who may not be living at a coastal area when the tsunami was about to hit, if that person is found in that area, so this would be called as exposure of this person. So you may not be a permanent resident of a place. So if you pay attention to what is happening in Myanmar, for example, yeah. So people from Myanmar, especially who were living in the landlocked kind of areas of Myanmar, especially the Rohingyas. So now when they have taken refuge in different parts of Bangladesh, and some of them, if not all, they are taking refuge in very vulnerable kind of areas, which are just next to the seashore. Yeah. So unfortunate part is that exposure has very little control. Like so human beings have very little control on their exposure. So it may be just by a matter of probability that you may be exposed to different hazards without being a native of that place. Yeah. So exposure, in very simple words, is like you being present at the place where the hazard is present and it's about to happen. So our presence in an area. So one part is the location. Second part is the wrong time when the hazard is about to happen. So if you pay attention, if you run this illustration, if you run this together, so exposure, the definition case is also here for your understanding. And all the definitions are universally accepted. There was a working group of the UNDRR which coined these definitions, I think somewhere in the end of 2016 or 17. Yeah, so these are universal definitions. But again, we don't need to memorize these definitions, in my view. So if we pay attention, exposure is nothing, but I have highlighted the most important aspect of this definition. It's the situation of people, infrastructure and housing, etc. And situation is that you being there. This has more to do with your time, like when you were there. Yeah. And location is about your spatial location. Yeah. So when if someone who is traveling in a landslide prone area, if the landslide takes place like 30 minutes later than that person has passed, there's no problem. Yeah. So there is very little disaster risk. Yeah. But if the timing and the location match very closely, then there is huge risk. So this is about exposure. And now if we run all the three aspects, one is hazard, second one is the vulnerability of that person or the built environment also. So if we pay attention to the vulnerability part, I'll just take a couple of minutes explaining this part, vulnerability. So vulnerability in this illustration, it may just be as simple as this stick, or like which represents this person's inability to run faster. Yeah. But if we pay attention, this vulnerability, which is represented with which is illustrated with this stick, if we, instead of this person, we have a building. So what is the vulnerability of a building? It would be, maybe it's weak columns, like there could be structural vulnerability, and there could be vulnerability related to the slope, the strata where you are living. So I reckon when I visited a country in West Africa, Senegal, so I got to see there were several abandoned houses in a place called as Rufisque. So there were several abandoned houses in Senegal which have been hit by sea level rise as a resultant hazard to climate change. So if we see these houses, if they are very low lying, so it increases their vulnerability. So when we run these three aspects, hazard, vulnerability, and exposure, when we run these three things together, it results as our risk. We call it risk. Now there is risk of losing lives. Now there is risk of losing property. Now there is risk of losing much more than just like life and property. There's multifaceted risk, economic risk, and environmental risks are also there. So just let me check the time. Yeah, okay. So disaster risk. Okay. Nitish, I have got an annotation request. Can I approve this? Because I have no idea. Annotations. Okay.
No, ignore it. No, ignore it.
Okay. I have
Ignore it.
accepted that. No, it's okay. Yes. Yeah. So we were discussing about, like, we have come up to this part, risk. What forms risk is the interaction of these three things. One is hazard, second is vulnerability, and third is exposure. So combined, these three things have created risk. So if we pay attention to the definition of disaster risk, according to the UNDRR, it is the potential loss of life, injury, or destroyed or damaged assets, which could occur to a system also, not just communities. Yeah. So I'll just skip this definition part because we have a few more things to discuss. So disaster risk equation, if we just try to kind of keep something in our head for future discussions and references, so it is very easy to remember that risk is equal to hazard into vulnerability into exposure. So hazard, we all know, is a phenomenon or human activity which has the potential to cause harm. Vulnerability is the condition or the circumstances which make a system more prone to kind of getting impacted by that hazard. And what is exposure? Like the presence of some people or presence of some elements, presence of these elements in the area where the hazard may happen. Yeah. So these three things combined create risk. But do we stop here? Is this enough, or we need something else? The fourth word that we discussed, my friends, was capacity. So if we pay attention to this fourth aspect of disaster risk, and it is very, very important. So even the poorest person living in the poorest places in the world, he or she is entitled and must have at least some capacities to reduce his overall risk. I hope you understand what I mean to say, but still we would discuss some examples along with this. Yeah. So before we do this, let's complete this equation. So in order to reduce your overall risk, yeah, we need to in order to reduce the overall risk, we need to reduce the vulnerability of people and societies and systems, and we need to increase their capacities. Yeah. So although they may look like the same, some people argue that reducing vulnerability is equal to enhancing capacities. I think it won't be even good for our own interventions if we kind of mix these two terms. Yeah. So vulnerability is more about the conditions. They may be the root causes. Like, you do not choose to be poor. Someone doesn't choose to be poor. It just happens. Yeah. Someone kind of taking birth in a family which is poor. Yeah. So let's face it. So things happen. So vulnerability has several factors and determinants which are driven by some factors which are beyond our control. But capacity is largely within the control of those individuals as well as the systems that they are a part of. So what I intend to say, there might be someone who is living at a place which is just next to a landslide prone area, for example. Yeah. So if this person has a strong government, for example, has a government which can provide that person alternative housing at a safer place, so this would count as a capacity. But what could be vulnerability in this example? Vulnerability is the condition that this person is living with. Like, maybe he is already living in a very dilapidated kind of house. Yeah. So we'll discuss a few more examples of how vulnerability and capacity play their role in our everyday lives. Yeah. But before we do this, let's have a look at what does the capacity constitute of. So this, my friends, is something which I strongly believe in. Yeah, it's not a universal kind of definition, and I would urge all of you to kind of just pay attention to this part. Yeah. So what capacity, in my view, is it comprises of these four aspects. One is strength. Very important. I think the most important part, because what we see today in a majority of the nations, even the richer ones, they have money, they have resources, but then maybe there's a gap in disaster risk governance. So what is this gap in disaster risk governance? Maybe there is not enough political will. Maybe there are gaps in decision making from administrative point of view. So this is why strength is very, very important in this framework of capacity, or I should say not a framework, but then this just conceptual understanding of capacity. So I would just take a few minutes to explain this capacity part. One is strength. And what does strength constitute of? Yeah. So strength, first and foremost, I think we all have knowledge. I have a smartphone just like yours. We all can search the almost the same knowledge. We can gain the same knowledge. We can access the same webinars and online courses. But what we do individually afterwards is what matters the most. Yeah. So this is about the moral imperative. I think this is very, very important for all of us to kind of feel morally accountable to our future generations, not just future generations, even the current ones. Yeah. So feeling morally responsible, like kind of recalibrating our moral compass so that we can save more and more lives and reduce the loss of lives and damage to property. So this moral imperative comes the foremost in the context of strength. And then you need will, a strong will, which is more like a statement. And then you need support also. You need a community which you can bank upon. You need a system or possibly a government also. Yeah. So which kind of supports maybe civil society. You need a society, you need a government which is pro innovation. Yeah. So if you do not have that enabling kind of environment, you would be losing strength. And then comes knowledge. So we do have a very good and I think very effective institution in India. It's NIDM, National Institute of Disaster Management, and they are the ones who are kind of imparting knowledge. And knowledge is knowing what to do. And skills, when you practice that knowledge, when you bring this knowledge to action, this is knowing how to do. So, and the fourth thing, which is again very important. Yeah. Nitish, someone is saying that he or she can't hear me, and I'm not sure whether I'm audible. Can you just confirm?
Yeah. Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. All right. So resources, there are multiple types of resources. Financial, yes, we do need money. We all need money for any form of disaster risk management initiative. But again, I would take your attention to the first one also. So if we all have a moral imperative, I think we still can manage to bring in financial. And moral imperative is not just the moral imperative of one person. It's the moral imperative of us all as a society. If you look at the examples from Japan or other nations which have done fairly good in dealing with disasters, you would find that there are several nations who have a similar kind of uh, economic status, like their GDP is more or less the same as Japan. But then what takes Japan on a different pedestal is the moral imperative Japanese people. And I have huge respect, and I believe that some of you already have the same kind of regard for the Japanese people in the way they deal with disasters. Because one thing is that they have to live with those hazards, like geological hazards in particular. But then more than financial resources, they have this moral imperative. And then you also need excellent human resources also, because if your people are not well trained, if your engineers are not very well skilled in terms of building codes, for example, you lack hugely on capacities. And the third part in terms of resources is technical. Now if you see, uh, in earlier times, there were gaps in terms of technical capacities of response teams. Like, for example, in India, uh, until I think a couple of decades ago, we used to read news stories like a pregnant woman was taken on the back of her husband to the nearby hospital, which was again 10 kilometers far. And in the course of this like mammoth task, the woman dies. Yeah, so these kind of examples were very common. But then in I think in 2004, we had a national ambulance emergency service scheme. So we call it 108 service, and now this forms a major part of our technical resources. So this combined becomes the capacity. So now, why do we need capacity? I'll just take, I think, 3 to 4 minutes, and then this discussion from my part, it is over. So why do we need capacity? This is the definition as per the UNDRI. You can just search this definition and kind of try to correlate with what I'm discussing with you. Yeah, so this is a universal definition. Yeah. So I'll just skip this part and come to something which I have to share with you. Okay, so developing capacities simply means that you are preparing yourself and your family and your community. So developing capacity is equal to preparedness. And why do we need the capacities? We need capacities to adopt various approaches. So you need to do something, no? Like you have disaster risk and you need to reduce this. So that's why we need capacity. So we need capacity for prevention, we need capacity for mitigation, for early warning, for response and recovery. Yeah. So now we are just quickly going through the approaches to disaster risk. How can you reduce disaster risk? So please pay attention to this part, because people think that you can apply the same approaches to all hazards. Sometimes some people think that this is a like all size fits all. Yeah, so this doesn't happen in real world. So for some hazards, the approach which is shown like this can work. This approach is prevention. What just happened is the outright avoidance. The avoidance of hazard is called as prevention. So next approach is mitigation. You see, the hazard, the source of the problem is still there, and you accept this, you live with this. And when you decide to live with this, so what happens is that you do something to reduce the overall risk. Yeah, so this is called as mitigation. And third part, please pay attention, because this is very crucial in terms of flood risk management, which is the core topic of this international training program. And this is very important, and our neighboring countries, and even in some parts of India, this has been successfully done in case of floods, and even in case of cyclones. Yeah, in case of cyclones, this approach worked really well in India, especially in the states like Odisha and West Bengal and Andhra Pradesh. So what is this approach? This is, we all know, getting the exposed population out of exposure, like communicating the risk well in time, like before something happens. So this approach is called as early warning. Yeah. So early warning refers to communicating the risk prior to the actual happening, and then when you communicate things nicely and well in time, so that the exposed population can get out of the exposure, then you can say that your early warning worked. Early warning is not just about telling people that it is going to rain at some places, which is quite a very common misnotion. Yeah, so people generally tend to think that the warning that you receive from weather department is essentially your early warning. No, this may not be early warning. This may just be a forecasting. Yeah, so early warning is a set of actions. Yeah, it has to result in reducing the exposure as well as like the overall risk of the people. Yeah, and the fourth, the second last thing in this presentation is approaches to DRR also include this. So you couldn't do something, or you did something like mitigation or prevention, it didn't work nicely, and we see that there is a risk. Yeah, so there is a risk of human life loss or maybe damage to property. But do you leave things right here in the same situation? No, we still do something. And whatever we do in a timely and in a very effective manner, and this is also something for which you need capacities. Yeah, so the swifter, the faster your kind of arrangements for effective response are, like the more trained your people are in terms of dealing with the aftermath of a disaster, so you can say that you have done something to reduce the risk, and this is called as response. And this last thing in this discussion from my end is, even after you have provided response, some people might have already lost their lives, but then some people are still surviving, and we have to ensure that there is no repetition of the similar kind of things in future. So whatever you do to improve the things, and this is not just improving the things in a way that you take the people back to the same situation they were in before that hazard struck. So the goal is building back better, not just the buildings, not just the physical structures, but also connecting the societies, ensuring that people have more harmony, more social protection, ensuring that they have more of economic and livelihood resources, than the earlier times. Yeah, and then you also ensure that people have access to other services, not just housing, but also access to say psychosocial counseling, because this is a very ignored part. We have seen, like, we are working in the state of Himachal Pradesh. Every time we visit a district disaster management authority for a training or something, so we keep on hearing from the head of the districts. They say that every day there are 2 to 3 suicide cases due to unemployment and the relevant things. So COVID has left us with an enormous challenge to deal with, which is now resulting in the form of a huge pandemic, which is showing up as a mental crisis, mental health crisis. Yeah, so this is very important for all of us to pay attention, that this part is an integral part of disaster recovery. So please pay attention to this one also. And I think this is the end of my discussion. Yeah, no, I think, yeah, okay. I'll just take a couple of minutes to finish this. So fundamentals of DRR mainstreaming is that instead of disaster management, you focus on disaster risk reduction. Okay, yeah. And instead of just normal developmental thinking, we need to pay attention to systems thinking. You need to think about the things like, if people are not having good mental health, then it would result in delayed recovery. Yeah, please pay attention to this part, because like online mode and like 45 minutes of time is very little time to even kind of appreciate the complexity of even systems thinking, concepts like systems thinking. But I'll just quickly finish it off, because I think other resource persons are also waiting. And then comes this part. Risk informed development is the need of the hour. And yeah, okay. Yeah. So Nitish, I had to rush it because I could sense that other resource persons are waiting. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, sir. It's a very complex and very related topic, and you try to like summarize in a very, very limited time, and we really appreciate that. And before I invite next speaker, I like to invite chief guest of the program, uh, Major General N.K. Bindal. Uh, he is currently
Nitish, I think we lost you.
Nitish, I think we are not able to hear you for some technical reason. So I'll introduce myself. Jai Hind to everyone. I am Major General M.K. Bindal. I am Executive Director of National Institute of Disaster Management, India. And it is a great honor and my pleasure to be here on this platform when we are having participants from many, many countries, and the youth is also here. And this whole platform is for the youth. And hence it's very important that this issue needs to be taken seriously, because youth is the future of the country, and youth is the one who are the first responders in every case, no matter what organizations you make, no matter what type of institutional mechanism you set up. The first responders are always the youth of the community, who help reach out, go out of the houses and start helping each other. And they are the key to the key link between the community and the responders or other people who come for response or relief. They become the link between them and they guide them to the correct places. So it's very important that the youth understands what is disaster management, understands the basics, and in special in this 3 days program, understands the flood risk management in particular, because this program is titled as Introduction to Integrated Flood Risk Management. National Institute of Disaster Management has been conducting large number of programs. If you will go on our website, nidm.gov.in, which I'll just type on the chat box, and you will see there are a large number of programs on disasters which we are conducting every day, 3 to 4 webinars, training programs with free certifications. So everyone is, and it is also open to participants across the world, and it is free of cost. You are encouraged to take part in that, and if you are willing to say something, or if you have expertise on some issue, you can always write and we can accommodate you. Having said that, I will come down to the topic. I'm really thankful to Nitish once again for calling me, and I'm overwhelmed by the plethora of distinguished panelists who are there. I just heard Mr. Navneet Yadav give out such a wonderful explanation of the risk definition, risk, vulnerability, hazard, and capacity, and come out with an index. So that was really good, and that is the basis of the whole thing. We call it hazard, risk, vulnerability analysis. HRVCA also, it is called hazard, vulnerability, risk, capacity analysis. Unless you do that, you cannot plan your disasters properly, and it has to be done for all phases of the disasters separately. And the whole disaster management plan thereafter, whatever you make, is based on this analysis that you do, which has been wonderfully explained by Navneet just before me. In my case, I will concentrate on just talking about urban flooding, because there are two types of flooding, urban and rural. And lately we are seeing that rural is where it is, but urban is increasing day by day. And because of COVID, we are facing a lot of difficulties, because if you don't, if you respond with less restrictions or precautions for COVID, you land up with more cases. And if you take too many precautions, you land up not giving the required response for the particular disaster. And hence, to find the right balance is the key. So that is something which we have to keep in our background, that COVID scenario management is slightly different and more difficult than most, I'll say slightly slower, because you compensate on speed because of the precautions that you need to take for COVID. However, if there is no COVID like it was earlier, all the steps can be accelerated and telescoped in distance and time. We have seen that there is an increasing trend of urban flooding, and it is a universal phenomena, and it poses a great challenge to the city administration and urban planners the world over. And problems associated with urban floods, they range from relatively localized incidents to major incidents, and resulting in cities being inundated for a few hours or several days. And therefore, the impact can also be widespread, including temporary relocation of the people, damage to civic amenities, deterioration of water quality, and risk of epidemics. So urban flooding is significantly different from rural flooding, as urbanization leads to developed catchments, which increases the flood peaks from 1.8 to 8 times, and flood volumes up by nearly 6 times. Therefore, the flooding occurs very quickly due to faster flow times, and sometimes in a matter of minutes in a restricted space. If I talk about India, the special feature of India that we have is we have very heavy rainfall during monsoons. However, lately it is being seen that it is not distributed evenly, and this heavy downpour in short period of time, which also is very erratic, is the norm. And therefore, the weather systems affecting the rainfall pattern are not being predicted very accurately for a longer period of time. Short-term predictions are good, but due to various climate change related activities, which was referred to Mr. Navneet also, IPCC, climate change, AR6, in which a lot of reference has been made on climate change, rainfall, and sea level rise. So storm surges are also affecting the coastal cities and towns. Then sudden release of water or failure to release water from dams also is having very severe impact on the cities. Then the urban heat island effect, which has also increased in rainfall over the urban areas. And global climate change, we all know, is resulting in changed weather patterns and increased episodes of high intensity rainfall events occurring in shorter periods of time. We have the threat of sea level rise, and it is threatening many coastal cities. There are a number of coastal cities, where it is predicted that in coming years they'll get submerged, and they've already started taking precautions to build walls ahead of the city into the sea to prevent that from happening. Stormwater drainage system is a major challenge in this whole urban flooding, because stormwater drainage, it calculates the mean and and you calculate another 20-30% over the mean, and you design it for that. But because of high intensity rainfall in a shorter time frame, the amount of rainfall which falls in that shorter time frame is beyond the capacity of the stormwater drainage system to work properly, and hence we see a lot of flooding which takes time to dissipate. Then also we have encroachments, which is a major problem in the areas, because they are obstacles to the flowing water in the respective watershed areas. And also habitations have started growing into towns and cities alongside rivers and water courses, natural water courses, natural lay of the land. So the flow of water, which has increased in proportion to the urbanization of the watershed, so the flow is getting affected, is getting restricted, and hence it is causing large amount of devastation. Then we also have an issue of improper, we means all over, improper disposal of solid waste, and both domestic, commercial, industrial, dumping of construction debris into the drains. So this is all reducing the capacity of the natural drainage system. And it is imperative that we take better operations and maintenance actions to ensure guard against these. And then there are a lot of challenges while responding to urban flooding, like access, roads are flooded, then coordination between the relief agencies, between different government agencies, as well as between government and private agencies. I remember in 2014, Srinagar earthquakes, I was there, I was handling the relief and rescue operations from the airfield. And there we had a whole lot of coordination meetings being held between the central government, state government, district authorities, and all NGOs, self-help groups, or anyone who was interested in donating something or helping out something, and a common plan was being made. It was excellent coordination mechanism that was going on in the Srinagar airfield at that point of time. And there used to be meetings morning and evening to coordinate the whole effort, where all stakeholders used to be called. So such type of system is very much required. And water supply and solid waste management, because in floods the water supply itself gets affected, and you don't have drinking water, and therefore restoring water supply is important. And while providing relief, water has to be a very high priority, because I remember again in Srinagar floods, the first supply aircraft which landed from some state had a lot of packaged food which had to be mixed in water to eat, but there was no water, and hence even though we distributed it, people could not use it. And thereafter, when the water came, and then they could use it. So such type of planning and priority of items needs to be laid down. Then public awareness is also lacking. Early warning capability in many cases is lacking. And sometimes when early warning capability is there, the community is not ready to react. Many a times you will find a lot of photographs where the people are requesting the people to move out of their house, lock up the house, and move to a safer area, but they're not moving because they are afraid of the change. They are afraid what will happen to all my belongings. So that behavioral change is a very big challenge that we are looking at. So there are many recommendations for integrated flood risk management that we can talk about, like I'm talking about only urban flooding now, that it has to be treated as a multidisciplinary manner. And hence, all stakeholders, whether it will be central government, state government, district government, civil society organizations, NGOs, researchers, academia who are doing research, like in this also I see so many doctors attending, doctorates who are attending. So such people have to be given a place, a space and a place to talk about it and have their views heard, so that whatever a plan is being made, it is holistic in nature and it caters to the actual pragmatic need of the people. And also it is important that different scenarios are played out in advance by creating vulnerability based geospatial framework, and which will generate and analyze different scenarios so that we are prepared for the worst. So understanding issues in urban flood disaster risk management is very, very important. And towards this end, this particular training program will go in a long way for the people who have attended. And it's a very high number who are attending, that they will understand to some extent as to how and what they require to do and why they require to do something. Vulnerability analysis and risk assessment is a must. Risk hazard assessment, which was explained just now, and mapping of the same geographically on a GIS platform if possible, it will also help. Then possible inundation level, including flood damages, can be made for different types of scenarios, so that adequate precautions can be taken. I will tell you, many floods which happen, it first your generators, your electronic systems like communication systems, communication centers, they all get flooded because they all have been made on ground floor, and they have been made years back when there never used to be flood in that area. And hence they are the first to get affected, and then they take a lot of time. So now the planning has gone to change to the fact that such things should be at least one floor above and should be built on stilts. The diesel fuel being used for the generator also needs to be kept on top rather than on the ground floor, because in Srinagar floods we found that even though the generator was kept on the rooftop, but the diesel was kept on the area on the ground, and hence again the whole thing was unusable, even though they had planned so well in that whole system. Also, there is response measures which are taken immediately prior to and following the event. They become very crucial in saving and protecting property. So disaster response mechanism has to be developed, in which development of early warning system, impact assessment framework, reaching out to the community and making them understand, early evacuation. Most of the time it is possible because we always get some lead time. So the evacuation locations, the shelters, all that SOPs and who will make what, where, which people will go there, segregation within the camps, all that needs to be worked out during the preparatory phase itself and not in the heat of the moment. So identification of the shelters, identification of the parties and their mock drills need to be carried out. And for all this, local benchmarks and performance standards need to be laid out so that it is a standardized and a well-oiled mechanism which comes. So timely response is very, very important. And generally it gets delayed or there is a failure because there is lack of planning and coordination. So planning and coordination is the key to integrated flood risk management. And in that, there should be developing institutionalized multi-agency collaboration in which clarity of the roles are there and responsibilities are there, and defining standard operating procedures at all levels for different stakeholders should be there. Enhancing public awareness And it has to start right from the school, and everyone should be made aware of what to do in floods, do's and don'ts, and what to do to prepare for an impending flood whenever it comes. Major issue that comes up after or during the aftermath of a flood is disposal of dead bodies, because many a times the dead bodies, mortal remains, are not found, or they are found in places where there are no one is able to identify. So that system needs to be well oiled and practiced whenever possible, so that everyone knows, so that everyone is given the last rites as per what they deserve, and we have to pay our respects to them, and as per the requirement of the both, whether local, religious, or ethnic requirements. Then it is very important that a quick post-disaster assessment, damage assessment needs to be done, so that the recovery is faster. And the people are back into their daily routine at the earliest, and the loss to the livelihoods is reduced to the minimum. Medical response system is a very major important part of it. And so we have seen that over the years, these things are getting shaped up. And through such programs, we are shaping the thought process of policymakers. And I always come for such programs, because after listening to this, I am always able to give out some very good suggestions of the policy interventions in the ministry meetings. And it actually changes the whole scenario and comes out as a better document. So I once again thank everyone. I've taken more than my allotted 10 minutes, but this is such an important topic that I thought I must speak more, because it is the youth which is concerned. And I'll encourage everyone to ask questions to every speaker, so that you go satisfied and convinced. And I will just give out my details on the chat box. Anyone who needs me to take part in something or coordinate with me can write to me or call me anytime. Thank you so much, and thank you, Nitish.
Thank you, sir. I think due to some technical issues, Nitish is unable to join us further, and he has requested me to introduce our next speaker for the day. I think Dr. Ms. Kusum from Sri Lanka, and I would like to invite Kusum ma'am. Ms. Kusum is from Sri Lanka, and she is the chair of the Network of Women Professionals, and also the founder member of the Sri Lanka Water Partnership, or Lanka Jalani. It is also called as Lanka Jalani. And she is the recipient of 2012 prestigious Women Award in water sector. And she is London-based International Water Association. This award was presented by London-based International Water Association. She was awarded in recognition of her long association and deep commitment to gender-related issues in water. So, ma'am, I request you to kindly initiate your session. Thank you.
Good evening. I hope I'm audible to everybody. Mr. Yadav, you can hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really been very interesting listening to the first two speakers. Mr. Yadav gave us a very comprehensive layout of what we should be looking for as water professionals. My congratulations to Major General R.K. Bindal. This is the second time I've been in a session with NIDM, and it's always a learning process when their staff is involved. So thank you very much, sir. Let me give a slight background to the people that I represent coming into this session. I'm involved in this activity because of an activity which happened last year called the Women, Water and Climate Tackling the Challenges Conference, where we had a group of people led by the Women for Water Partnership based in the Netherlands. network of women water professionals based in Sri Lanka, and the Soroptimists of Malaysia, coming together in an activity supported by SEI, Stockholm Environment Institute. Now, when we, all of you, I'm sure, have gone for many activities, conferences, workshops, etc. It always ends up with a nice little note, recommendations, or or a report. But how many times do we operationalize what is in that report? What we are seeing here is an activity by these main leaders, the Women for Water Partnership, Soroptimist International of Malaysia, a network of women water professionals Sri Lanka, and also joined by the Sri Lanka Water Partnership, to take forward this activity that we spent, I would say, blood, sweat, and tears, because we had to do it through the Corona period, through lockdown. And it came out with this output called the Way Forward. This is also online, and we will be able to give this to you at some point in time. I think the organizers will share it. I'm also very thankful to Anita Van Breda and Misaka Hettiarachchi from WWF US, because they have been very strong supporters. And together we have organized 2 different activities, one for Malaysia on Flood Green Guide, and another one for South Asian women water professionals. So basically, I think as much as I see all of you young people, not so young people, especially for the younger people, I have a problem, because I feel very guilty that the decisions made, the wrong decisions made during the last 50 years is going to lead to a lot of problems for you. So sorry for that. But let us try to rectify, at least in some sections, how we should go forward and what is it that we can do as committed professionals. So I would like to start off by showing a video that I had developed for the activity Women for, for the South Asian Women Water Professionals Training Guide. And once that is completed, I hope to have some questions in the chat. I believe the organizers find it difficult to give you the mic, but if you can please put it in the chat. I would like to have more interactive sessions. By the way, I am also I'm like you. I'm rather fed up of seeing little postage-sized faces. I'm used to people working on the ground, but we will try to make this as much as we can interactive. So over to you, Nitish, and Navneet, you would please put on the video. Thank you so much for being here.
Nitish, are you going to share or should I? Ma'am, I'll take a few seconds to just share my screen and start the video.
No problem. I can keep on talking if you like that.
Yes.
So, well, basically, I would also like, as you watch, please keep one word at the back of your mind, or at least 2 words: community engagement. Because I think as we had, when you're ready, please tell me. As we had a lot of good ideas from professionals, we have to look at this large group of people who never come to Zooms, who never come to organizations and conferences, workshops, the community. So as we watch, let us keep that group at the back of our minds.
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to share my slide just a minute. You can play the video, ma'am. Should I share the link?
Training. Now I can tell you my nearest experience of a flood is where the water came up to the front doorstep. I tried to look for my video because I had this experience of trying to see what I'm going to do next. What do I do? Do I take the dogs and put them away? I can't put them in the next house because they are Muslims. They will not keep the dogs. Where do I go with my 99-year-old mother? Do I have to pull off all the switches? And what happens when the flood gets into the electrical system? So I'm afraid though I'm not a victim of floods, I came very near to being a victim and trying to understand what is it that I would have to do and what I would have to would have my community to do, because if a flood comes, I think you are, in a sense, you are very much alone by yourself. But again, you are a part of an affected community. So both these things come together. Thank you very much, WWF and Anita and Nisaka. But I also have to thank my other partners who are listed down below, the Sri Lanka Water Partnership, Netwater, and the Women for Water Partnership. Thank you. I thought that I would talk, since we are thinking of a transformational time, a transformational strategy, I'd like to take you back to Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. My first training was in English literature and cultural studies. So very often I go back to my roots, and very often I find that my roots fit what I'm trying to do. If you're talking of flood, it's the best of times, it was the worst of times, it's the age of wisdom, it is the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope and the winter of despair. So I would like to take you through, but not exactly in the same list. Next, please. Why we are here in talking about gender is, apart from the persons that I mentioned, is a document called The Way Forward, which is the output of the project from the conference called Women and Water and Climate, Tackling the Challenges, which happened in a bit of a chaotic manner because of the pandemic. We had to go into a series of webinars. We had to go into hybrid conferencing. We did almost everything possible, but we got an output. And this output especially lists Asian women water professionals as a critical conduit for awareness and advocacy. And in our society, which is very often conservative, you ladies have a very important role to play, because you are that connection between your agencies, your academia, and the community. Next, please. The age of foolishness. I would, at the expense of being, making some of my engineering friends very unhappy, I think that, we had a situation where most of South Asia, except Bhutan, came from a post-colonial situation, but in the post-colonial situation, the colonial structures, the institutions and the mindsets continued to affect and impact on what we are doing in our post-independence work. The engineering science and the engineering ethos, which came to us from Western science, continues to be dominant. And nowhere is this better phrase than, Jawaharlal Nehru, who said, dams are the temples of the modern India. So there was this over-dependence on nature being controlled by human beings. But as we have seen, we don't always control it very well. And more we are going away from the old mindset which said, oh, it is only a 50-year flood, it is a 100-year flood, into having these disasters strike us sometimes twice or thrice a year. Next, please. Yeah, I think this video is going to play. And this is Oshadi, who could not join us because she had a problem. But this shows the Matara embankment.
This location, flood is prevented by this dam, and it prevents water flows to the low-lying area.
These embankments, which we find wherever we go, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in around the Mississippi, the ones which had a disastrous failure during the Katrina flood, is seen as our strong bulwark against damaging floods. But more and more we see that they are not working. Next, please.
For our next
Now, I think that, like I said on the first day, this is the worst of times. I can't think of a time where we have had so many damaging floods happening in so many countries at the same time. Can we have the next, please? If you go to the China floods, it is seen as, some of those visuals are very difficult to watch, but there are these little bits of information which says that urbanization has displaced much of the fertile ground which acted as a sponge for the floods. And that is why we have the floods gushing through the man-made tunnels which were supposed to control the floods. Next, please. In another, I think you would have all seen this. You've seen the German floods, German, Belgium, Netherlands, etc., all getting this one huge, unbelievable amount of water. But there is another little story in that little box, which says that the flood warning did not come in time because the flood warning in these countries is organized by the federal, the provincial systems. I think they call it a federal system. So the warning did not come fast enough. The floods preceded the warning. Next, please. Now, why am I not talking only about women? Please look at this. For me, this is symptomatic of everything which is happening in a flood. People are moving out. Some of them will be struck down by poverty. They will not ever come back. Men may migrate. They will leave de jure families becoming de facto families with female-headed households. The poverty is going to lead them into debt, which is going to lead into trafficking and child labor and children losing out on their schooling. And in some places, it will lead them into bonded labor, where they will never ever be able to raise their heads out of poverty. So this community on the march is a community which is men and women and children who may never recover from a flood, especially if this flood is as it is now, repeated twice or thrice a year. Next, please. Well, this is something which is about women. Now you can see, this woman on the top, she's probably trying to make some tea. So she has a kettle, but where she's going to find a fire in this flood is one thing. The other woman has a much more urgent need. She's carrying a packet of sanitary napkins, which is, probably not available, but it is so important. The third one has an unwelcome visitor, a crocodile. This is taken from somewhere of where Misaka lives, where the crocodile was, at the floods drained out. A crocodile was on the top of a coconut tree. If you can imagine this, there is a visual, we couldn't find it in time. And then when you have the flood, you try to save what is most valuable to you. And for this lady, it was her little puppy. Next, please. This, I'd like to play this because this is about the threat which follows floods, which is not only for women in South Asia, it is across the board. Please.
I do have an axe beside my bed and I closed my door. If somebody...
Now, this is this person in Germany who has to sleep with the axe by her door because of the threat. There's no doors any longer. There's no proper windows. There's no security. And even if you have women in a camp, the same problem of security, safety, sexual abuse, and sexual harassment can happen. Next, please. You've seen this, of course, as children. We all saw this little poem. But for me, this seems to be the best way of explaining this age of incredulity. That after all that we have learned within the last maybe 50 years, everything that we have learned about gender and water in the last 25 years, we still have a lack of integration. We still have the silo approach. We still think that, you know, we can think of gender as something different and floods as something different. And we find it difficult to put the two together. Next, please. You know, if you look at gender and water, we started with women in development, then we went to women and development. And to a certain extent, I feel that we have not been successful because we ourselves as gender consultants, as gender exponents, as gender supporters, we have been in our own little gender ghetto. And that, I feel, is something which we need to work towards. As much as we tell other people and other agents, we tell the engineers, okay, you have to look at community. We ourselves lack the powers of conviction which would have made them take that one step. So this is something that I would, you know, ask you to look at within your own context and your own agencies. Next, please. So therefore we have, sorry, one back, please, Luz. Yeah. Now, so the wide angle view which we need to look at to deal with this massive problem of floods, the ecological, the social, and the gender needs is not in our lexicon. It is not in the lexicon of the wider range of people, the agencies that I mentioned earlier, the academia and the community. If you do not think community, you can't think gender, and that is my very small line for almost every institution, every activity that we work on. Next, please. Now, this epoch of belief in Asia, we had this Japanese idea of river training. The river can be, you know, put into a concrete box and controlled. This failed a little bit, and then we had the Koreans talking during the time of the World Water Forum about the Four Rivers Project, where they were unleashing the rivers, trying to make the rivers flow. At the same time, we had the global thinking coming into unleashing the dams, you know, to a certain extent, I found that the Western countries were getting rid of dams and the Asian countries were building more dams. Just look at the Mekong, for instance. So this global urgency of floods should fuel a resurgence in flood management rethinking. That the control of the flood is not only by embankments, but there are so many other methods, which are most of them in your green guide, which we need to introduce to the community, to the larger communities. Next, please. So we have this little spring of hope, this tiny little flower coming up. We do need the leaders who are thinking like you, because you are here because you believe that Flood Green Guide was important. We need people who are not going to hide only behind structures, only behind engineering solutions, but who will seek the collaboration with other professionals and through it a gender sensitive action. So you need to understand that one size fits all doesn't work. You have to have bespoke strategies which are going to be operationalized for that particular catchment or that particular river. We have to think that we are in this critical phase called the action leading to 2030, the SDGs. How does this operationalize in what we are thinking and doing within the river with the Flood Green Guide? What kind of international support can we have? Because it is it is not one country, almost every country has a cash crunch. But there are lots of people who can spend $250,000 in having 11 minutes of free fall in outer space. Next, please. Yeah, so if we look at the best of times, this is after, my positive thinking after the flood green guide. We would go into hard and soft solutions. We do need technical thinking. I'm not, having this sort of working in this happy peasant myth where we think that, okay, we can do without engineers. We need a collaboration, a new technical thinking, but we need the ability to adapt. We could have a constant revision of our methods and our methodology because our context is always changing. By the time we do adapt to one flood, one which is much worse is going to land on us. And we have to have cross the board, cross the institutions, planning platforms, planning mechanisms where we have an integrated planning from all the institutions and agencies which are related to flood. Far too many of our flood planning is given to something called, in different countries, disaster management center. We should not be having a disaster management center. We should have disaster prevention and risk reduction. And also, when we try to do this persuasion, we have to build up our own interpersonal skills. We would not go very far if we start going around banging people on the head with a gender hammer. We need to have team building. We have to have the powers of conviction. If we want people to change, we have to be able to convince them that there is something in what he says. And this networking has to come again. I'm not sort of using the word gender everywhere, but between generations and between the disciplines. Next, please. So hopefully with the flood green guide, the age of wisdom is going to come upon us. And this is again the hard and soft coming together, and different agencies and different, as you see there, I think this is taken from your own training, Anita, somewhere. And we have this carriers, younger people, older people, different people coming together. But again, remember there is one group which is having a very strong say in what we do, and they are very difficult to convince, and they are politicians. So at some point, we have to start talking with politicians as well. Next, please. Yeah. When somebody told me that all these things which look very hardcore, bulletproof vests, fire escapes, windshield wipers, and laser printers were all invented by women. So ladies, you have this new group called the TikTok influencers. All of you, for me, are TikTok influencers. Maybe you don't have to have feathers in your hair and, paint all over your face, but you are influencers. And these new influencers are what we would need in taking the flood green guide concepts, principles, and strategies forward. Next, please. So let me share this last thought with you. Strong women aren't simply born, they are made by the storms they walk through. All of you, if you are a woman water professional in Sri Lanka, I bet I know every storm that you have walked through, because we have known people to go through the same experience. But it has only made you stronger. It has not made you fail or fall. So I congratulate you that you also made time. It is not easy for women, especially with families, COVID, dogs, cats, floods, to come to a session like this, but you did it, so that's great. Next, please.
Una mattina mi sono svegliata, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Una mattina mi sono svegliata ed ho trovato l'invaso.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you very much, Navneet, for playing that. audience, it was meant for this activity which we call the South Asian Flood Green Guide Training for Women Water Professionals. But I think that it will also give us some kind of inclination of what we are doing as we go forward into 2030. And a group which is being left behind in many ways, that is the 51%, the women. So let me quickly, can you please tell me how much of time we have left? 10 minutes?
Minutes. Now we have.
Navneet?
Ma'am, this is Nitish. We have 15 minutes for Q&A.
Sorry?
Am I audible?
Not very. 15 minutes?
15.
Okay.
15 minutes.
15. Okay. Now, you know that we talk that in the 21st century, the water is the new oil. But when we talk of floods, we have far too much of water. If anybody thought that 2021 is going to be what it is, we would have asked the UN to say, why don't we call this the year of floods? Because almost everybody is having floods. And almost everybody is having what they call the 100-year flood coming over and over again. 2018, Kerala had these massive floods in India. Kerala has floods again. So as we go on, I am not going to talk to you or lecture to you, but in the Socratic way, I'm not here to teach you. I'm only here to make you think. And I hope that this would be a thinking time, a think fest, because you as young persons and not so young persons who guide groups, it is really important for us to look at the community perception. We have talked, our speakers earlier have talked about what should happen. But will any one of these words, these concepts, be there in a community group? I would think that is there some way that you can put your questions or perceptions in the chat? That would be fantastic. And the other one is, I would like to know now, how many do we have here? How many of you have actually experienced a flood? Seriously. Have you been ever washed out? I see only one hand, I think. Others are. Okay. Have you ever had the experience of leaving your house? Have you ever had the experience of losing someone in a flood? Have you ever had to go and bury somebody who died in a flood? These are experiences that I do not want to wish on anyone. But unfortunately, it is coming on us for more and more because of what we do and what we have failed to do. So we have the sins of omission and the sins of commission. Now, let me pick up on this one question which has come up on the flood. We are talking about a person who's talked about funding. And this is a train of thoughts which goes across everything that we are doing and everything that we have to do. Now, why is it that we have things called flood funding or disaster management funding? And why is it that I keep on asking, why is it that we are not having disaster prevention? Now, I think that to a certain extent, we are still in our colonial mindset. And I know there are a lot of people from Africa, but you have also experienced this colonial mindset. And this is something which is making us saying, this is what happens when a flood comes. But more and more, we have to make sure that we work on prevention. How do we work on prevention? Number one, it starts in our universities. And I believe there are university students here, at least some from Sri Lanka, I know. And does disaster management, disaster response, disaster risk reduction come in any one of your syllabi? I think that is where we need to start. Because I would like to share this one little, I don't have it in on screen, but if you'd like to look at this, can you see this one? As you can see, it is a book that we did after the tsunami. Now, the tsunami was one disaster that we were not prepared for. We didn't even know the word tsunami. So when that happened, we had a program supported by a very strong personality. Again, I would like to give my deep, grateful thanks to him. Honorable Ruitaro Hashimoto from Japan, who supported not for us to become, to build back better, but to build back communities better, to change the thinking. So we decided that we would go into this series of books, which would go into communities and to schools. So unfortunately, disaster risk reduction, disaster preparedness is now happening to be something we have to start from school level. And I think that was mentioned by one of the earlier speakers. The second one that I would like to think is capacity building. Now, is capacity building something which happens for professionals in agencies, professionals in universities, or is it something that we need to, as I said earlier, put yourself in the community mode and see what kind of capacity building you would need? In the earlier speakers, he mentioned some instances which have these situations. Capacity building is not something that usually comes into our South Asian planning, except now, perhaps it is, the disasters are propelling us to do it. But usually I feel that, it is a case of a professionals going and talking to the village and sometimes talking down to the village. When we look at a community, we are looking at a group of people who have been fairly resilient in overcoming many issues, including floods. Now, the landslides, for instance, when you go and meet a community which is landslide affected, you might find that a landslide happened there earlier. So how do we build in their needs and their responses? Because they may have quite a different way of going into floods, what is needed from floods or what is needed after a flood, than what we as professionals do. As we know, I presume we are all educated in a certain to a certain level. We think that we are the intellectual elite. We think that we are professionally at a different level from the community, but we have a lot to learn from the community, because as was rightly said, they are the first responders. They are, in very many of our countries, we tend to say that the Army, Navy, and the police are the first responders, but that is not so. It is the man who is next to you who is going to be your first responder. And then how does all of this come into gender? I have glossed through some of the issues that are being affecting women, especially those who are affected in the floods. But again, we need to make sure that the modules that we plan, the disaster management modules or disaster preparedness modules, as you would like to say it, are having a definite gendered perspective. Now, it is extremely difficult to have a gendered perspective for a flood management guide if it is not available overall and across the board in a national sense, in a national guide, in a national training program. Because we don't need to have a specific activity called gender. We need to mainstream gender into our total activity. And then again, I'm looking out for, okay, somebody wants to know how can we have such materials from our local disaster prone areas. Okay, I think that every one of these, the materials that you need to develop, you can look at something from a different country, but it has to be how shall I say, from your own context. It has to be very strongly built on your own context. It has to look at your problems. It has to look at your perceptions. And the cultural context of every one of these countries would be very, very different. So I think it is very difficult for us to give this one size fits all solution. And that is something that we can, to this gentleman from Uganda who's giving these questions. Other than that, I would really look, Nitish, are there any other questions which are coming from our speakers?
I think
Because
yes,
I
ma'am.
would like this to be an interactive session, not a talk fest.
Ma'am, there's one question for Mr. Navneet Yadav. The question is, vulnerability come across a diverse list of factors. How can we come up with a holistic approach to reduce it?
I am sorry, but I can't hear you. I really can't.
Okay, am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Okay,
Yes.
there's one question for Mr. Navneet Yadav. Vulnerability comes across a diverse list of factors. How can we come up with a holistic approach to reduce it?
Thank you for this
Actually,
question. Yeah, ma'am, would you like to respond to that?
no, yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the foremost thing with regard to like addressing the vulnerability is that we carry out a very holistic kind of vulnerability assessment, because I think as you might have heard from the experiences of Kusum ma'am, I think it's very important that we talk about the intersectional vulnerabilities, like, because vulnerability is not just about gender, vulnerability is not just about disability, vulnerability is not just about the physical kind of setting, the built environment that you are referring to. I think that's why the importance of a multifaceted vulnerability assessment it gains traction, because I think we have carried out a hazard vulnerability and risk assessment in the state of Himachal Pradesh, and I reckon I think we carried out research on, I think, 8 to 9 different indicators, including disability, gender, and like how people's lives are shaped. And you need to analyze vulnerability from multiple lenses. So that's, I think, my take on this. So you can certainly address different forms of vulnerability, but only when you know what are the specific types of vulnerability we are referring to. Yeah. So, ma'am, would you like to add to that? Because
Yeah, I think that in identifying the vulnerable, it would be very useful if you can proceed with a gendered perspective, because it is really important that I mean, we know that we come with men, women especially, and women may be disabled women, from certain groups, castes, will come with their own burdens. And when it comes to a disaster, it happens that, the burden is sort of doubled and trebled. So I think that it is really important for us to build a generation of young people who will come with that open mind and who will look at every activity, every issue, which is then going to be maybe translated into policy, because in the end it is the younger professionals who will be forced to take on the issues which are now piling up on us, one after the other. So I mean, they need to be much more resilient even in their thinking and how they approach these problems. The problems are going to escalate. Yeah, my first time that I heard the word high intensity floods was in 2001. And at that time, people were laughing and saying, what is this thing called climate change? Now climate change is on us, it is upon us, and it's no longer a laughing matter. 100-year floods are coming every year.
Thank you, ma'am. There's one more very interesting questions to like both of you can answer. Recovery is very important for post-disaster. And in the recovery stage, build back better theory is important. Do you think corruption is increasing in least developed countries like us, which actually hampering build back better theory in recovery stage? Should I repeat? Should I repeat one more time?
Yeah, please.
Okay, sorry. The question is, do you think corruption is increasing in least developing countries like us, which actually hampering Build Back Better theory in recovery stage?
Navneet, would you like to go first, please?
Ma'am, you can share your thoughts first and then I'll conclude.
I would like to pull out a book, and if you can go first, I'd like to show you something.
Okay, in my view, I think, yeah, it's not just recovery. I think in the complete disaster risk management cycle, the issue of corruption has been highlighted. There are several research papers which highlight how the development is not so risk informed. Even sometimes even if the risk assessment has been done properly, but then the ultimate decision taking that takes place is not considering those risk related reports because of corruption. So it's not just recovery, and I think it becomes even more important in the recovery phase, because huge money flows in, and we all know, like I've been working in disaster response and recovery field for several years. So I can testify to that when huge money flows in, there are huge chances that organizations, and especially the ones with lower levels of moral integrity, they kind of indulge in activities. It basically steals off the possibilities of the affected people to have a more sustainable recovery. And corruption certainly is a thief which steals these opportunities. So yeah, ma'am, over to you, please.
Yes, thank you very much, and well said. Corruption, yes, a disaster is one man's. It's a disaster for someone, but it could be a bonanza for many others. And as you well rightly said, there is a lot of corruption which follows every disaster. I went for this book by one of my very favorite books. It's called Everybody Loves a Good Drought by a famous Indian journalist called P. Sainath. He talks about droughts, but this thinking, goes across the board to all other disasters, including landslides, floods, etc. So I think that I hope that all of you will take time to read the Flood Green Guide by, which has been put together with a lot of effort from the World Wildlife Fund, because it gives us a different way of approaching the problem. And if we can think that we don't always have to go for these hardcore engineering solutions, we might think that, we have some way of easing this running sow, which is corruption. But then we also, in order to have that, we have to have strong communities who are strong enough, brave enough to get up and state their case. And that happens only when you have a long-term support to build capacity within the communities. And as a gentleman always said, we are always short of funds. We don't have, we have enough money to go on tours of outer space, but we don't have enough money to put into capacity building for disasters.
Thank you, ma'am. And we really love to hear more discussion, but time is over. And we are in the end of our training. And if there are any questions, we will get back to you later. And really thank you very much to Ms. Kutsum, Mr. Navneet Yadav, and Major Bindal. And we are really grateful you took your time and stayed with us. Thank you very much. And tomorrow again, at the same time, we will meet again. Thank you very much. And we will be discussing tomorrow more about the book which Ms. Kusum was mentioning about, Green Guide, Flood Guide. And thank you. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nitish. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.